So welcome to 14.1, the Science of Ecology. There's some terms here that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the difference between abiotic and biotic factors. We're going to be defining an ecosystem and other ecological concepts. Very important in the science of ecology is how energy flows through ecosystems. So we'll be looking at food chains, food webs, and trophic levels. As we mentioned earlier in the welcome, ecology is a study of how living things interact with each other and their environment. It is a major branch of biology, but has overlap areas with geography, geology, climatology, and other scientists. One of the first terms that we'd like you to learn in this chapter is the difference between abiotic factors and biotic factors. Abiotic factors are non-living factors such as sunlight, soil, temperature, water, and the amount of precipitation, the amount of rainfall an area gets. Biotic factors, on the other hand, are the living aspects of the environment, all members of different and the same species. The ecosystem is a unit of study of nature and is the focus of study in ecology. It consists of all the biotic and abiotic factors in an area and their interactions. And they can vary greatly in size. For example, one lake could be considered an ecosystem. So could an individual dead log on a forest floor. But both the lake and the log contain a variety of species that interact with each other and the abiotic factors. The picture here is of a desert ecosystem, and it may not look like there's a lot of life in a desert, but there really is. So pretty much every ecosystem on our planet receives energy either in the form of sunlight or chemical compounds. The vast majority of ecosystems on our planet receive it from sunlight. Producers are organisms that produce food for themselves and other organisms. They use energy and simple inorganic molecules to make organic compounds. We studied this when we studied photosynthesis. So phototrophs use energy from sunlight to make food by photosynthesis. Those include plants, algae, and there are certain bacteria also. Chemoautotrophs use energy from chemical compounds to make food by chemosynthesis. They include some bacteria and also archaea. Archaea are microorganisms that are close and resemble bacteria. Organisms like us, on the other hand, are consumers, and these depend on other organisms for their food. For example, we cannot take sunlight in and just make food for ourselves. Organisms called herbivores consume producers such as plants or algae directly. Carnivores consume animals. We, on the other hand, are called omnivores, and omnivores consume both plant and animal matter. So let's take a look at another important concept, and that's the importance of a niche. The niche is the actual area of an ecosystem that an organism occupies. For example, let's take a look at the beaks of these birds. You'll notice that wildly different shapes, and those different shapes have a lot to do with how they function. So each of these species has a beak that is suited for its niche. For example, the long, slender beak of a nectivore, right over here, would be perfect for going into a flower and grabbing sugar. Here we have a picture from your text which talks about the different types of phototrophs in an ecosystem. So for example, trees and grasses would be in terrestrial ecosystems. Terrestrial means they're just on land. Algae, in this case diatoms, and seaweed would be found in aquatic ecosystems. And bacteria and aquatic terrestrial could also be found in either one, in either aquatic or terrestrial. When organisms die, whether they be plants or animals, they leave behind energy and matter in what remains. And there's a whole category called decomposers that break down that and allow the matter to recycle in the environment. There are decomposers like scavengers, detritivores, saprotrophs. All of these take a portion of dead matter and break it up. Make sure that you read and understand that. We also mentioned earlier how important the flow of energy was. So here's our consumer, the plant at the bottom, and you'll notice there's a blue line which goes up here. That blue line represents the energy moving in a chain, in this case, a very, very simple food chain, which goes from the plant to the grasshopper, to the bird, to the snake, and to the owl. So this is a food chain which includes both producers and consumers. Let's look at something a little more complicated, and that's a food web. Once again, down here, we have phytoplankton, we have our producers. This is what does the photosynthesizing and creating the food. But then look how many organisms depend either directly or indirectly on that phytoplankton. So that's important to keep the healthy environment for phytoplankton. Here's another example of two food webs. One, the ocean food web, which is here, again, starting with phytoplankton, and on the ground, a terrestrial food web, and that's a producer right here. All of these organisms depend on the energy created by, in this case, grasses, and in this case, phytoplankton. This is a diagram that's really important to ecologists, and this is called the Ecological Pyramid. And this pyramid shows how energy and biomass decrease as you go from different trophic levels. Here's the bottom trophic level, where the primary consumers are, up to the secondary consumer, the tertiary, which means the third, the quaternary, the fourth, and finally, whoever is on top, in this case, this type of raptor or hawk, up on the top of the ecological pyramid, and the final trophic level. As this happens, assume that producers in this pyramid have about 1 million kilocalories of energy. And as it moves up, we get less and less of that energy available to each of the trophic levels. So that ends 14.1. Please read through the lesson summary. And if there are concepts that you're not sure of in the lesson summary, really go back and read them in our text. You could also review this. Great, we'll see you for section 14.2.